Hey guys, it's Will from Magic the Friendly Tavern again, back with another Yu-Gi-Oh video. Don't worry guys, for those looking for my Magic content, I'll be uploading some of that really soon. But right now, I've been playing a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh because Standard and Magic is not great at the moment. And I just uploaded a video where I went +4 with this Lightsworn deck, and I figured I'd do a deck profile on it. So let's get to it. What do Lightsworn do? Well, Lightsworn, as the name implies, are light attributed monsters, and what they like to do is fill up the graveyard by self-mill. Now, when we say self-mill, that's a magic term, meaning that you put cards from the top of your library into your graveyard face up, and you get benefit from it. This is a classic graveyard deck that allows you to swarm the field with multiple monsters and chain into some pretty powerful effects. So let's break it down. First of all, we want to run a 60 card deck, as you can see, in Lightsworn, because that gives us the ability against 40 card decks to utilize this restricted card, the grass that looks greener. Which states, if you have more cards in your deck than your opponent does, you send cards from the top of your deck to the graveyard, so you have the same number of cards in your deck as your opponent. So you split the difference. And that means that you get to drop 20 cards into your library, which can set you up really nicely. That's why we run a 60 card deck. Now, two things you got to realize about the self-milling and filling your graveyard up with cards is that you're going to run out of cards eventually and deck yourself. You're going to die from trying to draw from a library that has no cards in it. So you kind of put yourself on a clock with this, but it's okay because the benefit outweighs the punishment. Another thing is you're very, very tied to the very first opening hand, because when you start milling, a lot of stuff that you would like to draw into, you will not be able to draw into. Now, we have some mitigating factors for that, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Another thing that you got to realize is this deck causes a lot of high variance because you don't know what's going to end up in your graveyard when it ends up there. Now, Lightsworn have payoffs for having different Lightsworn creatures in the graveyard with different names. So we run a lot of effects just so we have a variety of different names for our creatures. Okay then, on top of the Lightsworn, we also run Twilightsworn monsters, which are actually dark attribute, because we have effects that want both light and dark creatures to make them work. Plus the Twilightsworn creatures allow you to banish Lightsworn creatures from your graveyard to activate powerful effects. Alright, now on top of that, we also have hand traps, which are creatures that you can discard to your graveyard for different effects that will stop your opponent's effects or give you value off of your opponent's effects. Now, we also have regular disruption down here in quick play spells and traps, normal traps, counter traps and stuff. But some of them, like this row right here, the Solemn Offerings, the Forbidden Droplet, and the Called by the Grave, if they hit the graveyard, you can't use them from the graveyard. You won't ever get them again. And since you didn't draw them, they're effectively useless. So running a whole bunch of Regekis and a whole bunch of effects like that are actually counterproductive to what you're trying to do. Now, we do have some effects we can use from the graveyard, such as Galaxy Cyclone's second ability, and Lost Wind will return itself from the graveyard if triggered by your opponent summoning an extra a monster from their extra deck. So those we don't mind if they get milled to the graveyard. Now let's do a card by card breakdown. The first card we're going to look at is obviously the first card in the list, Maxi. Maxi is a staple in almost every deck as a 3-of. The reason why is because swarm decks that go into long summoning chains special summon a lot of monsters to the battlefield. And every time they do that, Maxi will trigger and draw you a card. Now this is great because card advantage is how you win card games. The more cards you see, the more answers you have, the more options you have, the better off you are. Now be careful against a deck like a danger deck that can do an infinite summoning loop. They can actually deck you if you max C them. So be aware of that. Some players that are smart will realize that you max C and they will stop their summoning chain at pass turn just so you don't get any value. Other players will risk it thinking that you won't draw into interaction anyways and go ahead and finish your summoning chain. Whatever happens, max C is not a guaranteed win. It is, however, a powerful card advantage effect, which you will also see in this deck. I have a lot of card draw. This deck supports a ton of card draw. Moving on, we'll go into our first Lightsworn monster, Rico. Rico will, when normal or summoned or flip face up, I can banish one Lightsworn monster from my graveyard to banish one card on the field. Now, banish is not a destroy effect, so the card does not end up in the graveyard. This is awesome. This allows me to deal with graveyard recursion threats. It allows me to deal with lots of threats. It's removal. It's really good. It also has a second ability where if I have a Lightsworn effect that activates, I can send the top 3 cards of my deck to my graveyard, so self-mill. That is a 1-of because we just don't have that much room to run a whole bunch of them. But running multiple copies of this card is not bad, but it's diminishing returns since you have to give up a card out of your graveyard to activate it. Next, we have Lumina, the Lightsworn Summoner. Now, the great thing about the Summoner is once per turn, I can discard one card and target one level 4 Lightsworn monster in my graveyard and special summon it. Then, at the end of my phase, I can send 3 cards to the top of my graveyard or my deck into my graveyard. This is great to get out exactly what you need. The discard effect seems like it's a negative, but it's actually good because we have 2 creatures, Wolf and Fellas. The problem with Wolf and Fellas is they cannot be normal summoned or set. They must be special summoned by a card effect. So if they're in your opening hand or you draw into them, they're dead cards. They're dead cards, and you want them in your graveyard, not in your hand, because they're useless there. So being able to discard them with your Lightsworn to be able to summon another creature is excellent. It's an excellent way to get them out of your hand into the graveyard where you need them. Next, we're going to talk about Arcus. Now, Arcus is kind of a double-edged sword. He hasn't really done anything terrible to me yet, but there is a possibility. And the reason is because it says neither player can target Lightsworn monsters anywhere with card effects. That means your graveyard, your hand, the battlefield, you just cannot target it. This is good. This stops your creatures from being destroyed by removal, creature effects, and everything else. But if I go to, like, say, Monster Reborn, one of my creatures that targets a creature in the graveyard. So Arcus can shut that effect off. I haven't had it happen to me yet, but it is a possibility from what I understand reading the card. So he's good, but a double-edged sword. Be careful. That's why I only run one of them. The next card I run a 1-of is Minerva, the Lightsworn Maiden. She has very dismal stats. Her stats are terrible. But when this card is normal summoned, I can have one light dragon type monster from my deck to my hand, whose level is equal to the total number of Lightsworn monsters with different names in my graveyard. See, that's that different Lightsworn monster names coming up as an ability. If this card is sent from the hand or deck to the graveyard, I can send the top card of my deck to my graveyard. During each of my end phases, I can send the top 2 cards of my deck to your library. So if I face up normal summon this monster, I at least get the in phase affected mill and 2 cards. Usually, and if it goes from my deck to the hand by another mill effect, I also get an extra mill, so it's pretty good. As for its normal ability of getting a Light Dragon monster, I've actually never actually got it to trigger. Just because I didn't have the prerequisite of the correct number of Lightsworn monsters with different names in my graveyard. But that's okay. It's still a good card. Next is Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit, which is not a Lightsworn, but a hand trap. It's also a tuner. Most of your hand traps are also tuners, so they allow you to synchro summon monsters. That's at least useful if it's not going to be useful as a hand trap if you have to summon it. They also have 1800 defense, which isn't terrible if you face down summon them, and then they're flipped up. What this card does is if a monster on the field activates effect, or a face-up trap or spell or trap activates an effect, as a quick effect, I can send this from my hand or the field to the graveyard and destroy that card. Now, it will not negate the effect, but it will destroy the card. That is useful from time to time. It at least gets the card off the field. It helps with some problematic monsters. Good card. I would like to run more, but I just don't have room, so it's a one of. Next, I have 2 copies of Ash Blossom, which sometimes should be 3 copies. It depends on what you're facing. As a quick effect, I can discard this card to negate certain effects. And what these effects are anything that adds a card from the deck to the hand, graveyard, or if they special summon a monster from the deck without sending it to another zone. So this stops add effects. This stops people from adding cards from their library to their hand or graveyard, except for their first draw. They get their first draw every turn. You can't negate that. Lots and lots of decks add cards from their library to their hand. It's such an ubiquitous effect that Ash is usually run of as a 3 of in every deck. I recommend at least running Ash and Max C as your hand traps in almost every build you make. It's just that important. You will see Ash, counter Ashes all the time. And because people play Ash, people also run Called by the Grave, because Called by the Grave nullifies Ash, but we'll get to that. Next, we're going to talk about Lumia. Lumia is a Lightsworn. Now there is Lumia, the Lightsworn, but there's also a Lightsworn version. Rico's the same way. All the Lightsworn are like that. Now what this does is, once per turn, I can banish a Lightsworn monster from my hand or graveyard, and then target one banished Lightsworn monster and special summon it. That means, say, with Rico, I banish a Lightsworn monster. Later, I can get that Lightsworn monster back and special summon it. Also, if a Lightsworn monster's effect is activated, I can mill 3 cards. This is in here usually just for double name and being a dark monster. Its effect is negligible. I don't use it very often. Usually, this Lightsworn is a creature that I target from my graveyard to banish to activate the effect of Rico or something. But it's in there. It's all right. Just as a one of. Next is another hand trap. We're going to talk about Ghost Bell. Sometimes if you're in a graveyard-centric meta, you're going to want to run more Ghost Bells, because like Ash, this stops add effects, but it stops add effects that specifically send cards to the graveyard or move cards out of the graveyard or special summon monsters from the graveyard. This effect is very niche and isn't useful in every matchup. That's why this is a one of. But when it is good, it's clutch. It's really good. So I recommend it. Next is Jane, the Lightsworn Paladin. It's a warrior Lightsworn. The great thing about it is if it attacks an opponent's monster during the damage step, it gains 300 attack. So it's already an 1800 attack monster. It can add up to 2100 attack when it hits another monster, which is really good, meaning that it can deal damage to a lot of smaller creatures, a lot of utility creatures it can take out. It can take out some bigger special summon monsters. Decent. It also mills for the top 2 cards at the end of the phase. It's also a different named Lightsworn for Billies that care about that. Next is Lila, the Lightsworn Sorceress. I can target one spell or trap on my opponent controls after a summon, and this card's battle position can't be changed until the end of the next turn. Also change this card you control from face-up attack position to face-up defense position. So it goes from a 1700 attacker to a 200 defender, but it will destroy the target spell or trap that you target with it. So you kind of put it in a vulnerable state, but it's removable. At the end of phase, it also mills 3 cards, so it's decent. I have other effects to deal with traps, a lot of them, so that's why this is a one of. Next, we're going to talk about Garroth, the Lightsworn Warrior. He's a 4-star, meaning you can normal summon him, just like all my other lower rarity stuff. And he's a Lightsworn. He has a different name, which is good. He also has a giant attack for a 4-star monster. It's an 1850. An 1850 deals with a lot of other creatures that are normal summon. So that's decent. Each time that another Lightsworn effect is triggered and sends a Lightsworn monster to the graveyard, you also get to send the top 2 cards of your deck to the library, to the graveyard. If a Lightsworn is sent to the graveyard from this effect, you get to draw 1 card. So it's card advantage. It's kind of convoluted, doesn't trigger often, but when it does, it's good. Decent. Plus, it's a different named Lightsworn for your effects. Next, we have a 3 of Wolfgar. The Lightsworn Beast. What's good about Wolf, or what's bad about Wolf, is he cannot be normal summoned or set. So if he's in your hand, you can't normal summon him. That's terrible. He must be special summoned by a card effect. But the great thing about him is if he's sent from your deck to your graveyard from the self-mill from other Lightsworn, you get to special summon it directly into play. And he's huge for a 4-star monster. He's 2100 attack power base. That's awesome. That's really, really good. The bonus added effect of being able to special summon him from your graveyard if he's milled is being able to get out 2 creatures to go into your Exceed summons, or to go into your Synchro summons if you have a tutor. So his effect is really good. He's a 3 of to increase the likelihood of him being milled and you getting to summon him for free. That's why he's a 3 of. Next, we have Genis, the Lightsworn Mender, which has 2100 defense. That makes her a good defensive monster. That's why she's in here. During the end phase, if a card was sent from your deck to your graveyard by an effect by a Lightsworn card, you inflict 500 damage to your opponent, and if that damage goes through, you gain 500 life points. That effect is negligible. She's really in here as just another named Lightsworn creature, plus her defense in situations where I need to turtle up. That's basically about it. This card is easily replaceable by practically any other card. You can see over here on the list, I have pulled up all the related cards to Lightsworn, and as you can see, I'm running most of them, but there are a few I'm not running, such as Shire, Rico, Lightsworn, and Rena, Lightsworn Rogue. That's because their effects are just not good enough in my eyes to run. So Genis gets a spot over those cards. Next, we're going to talk about Aaron, the Lightsworn Monk. What's good about this card is if it attacks a defense position monster, during damage calculations, shuffle that monster into the opponent's deck. That's really good for monsters that can't be destroyed by battle, that take no damage, that are just there getting in your way and stopping you from advancing your game plan through attack. Also, at the end of turn, it mills 3 cards. So decent. Another name for your effects. Get the mill, and it can in some matches it's clutch to be able to get through a barrier, an attack barrier. That's basically about it. Next, we're going to talk about Raiden Hand of the Lightsworn. First of all, he's a tuner, so he can be used to synchro summon. That's really important. Next, he has 1700 attack, but he also has an effect that you can activate to mill the top 2 cards of your graveyard. If a Lightsworn monster is sent to the graveyard by this effect, it gains 200 attack. If you mill 2 Lightsworn monsters, it gets 400 attack, I do believe. Usually, he's about a 1900 attack for a turn. Then at the end of your turn, you mill another 2 cards. You don't get the extra attack power off of this ability after the second ability, but that means you can play Raiden on turn 1 and mill 4 cards by the end of the turn into your graveyard, which is a good setup. So he's a 1-of. Next, we have 2 Feeless Lightsworn Archer. This is just like Wolf. This card cannot be normal summoned or set. It must be special summoned by a card effect. Again, if it goes from the deck to your graveyard by a monster effect, by one of your other Lightsworn milling, you can special summon it. So it's just like Wolf. It's an extra card that you can special summon. That's why it's a 2-of. The reason it's not a 3-of is because unlike Wolf, it's a defensive monster. It has 2,000 defense. You don't want to put it face up in attack mode. You want to put it face up in defense mode because it's a defensive creature. It also, during your turn, you can tribute this card and target one the monster your opponent controls and destroy it. That's a good effect. That also makes it worth playing as a 2-of, more than a 1-of. So I have 5 creatures that can be milled into my graveyard and returned to the battlefield. Next, we're going to talk about the MVP of the deck. This card is so important. If you're going to run anything in a Lightsworn deck that's not Lightsworn, it's got to be this card. This is called Fairy Tale Snow. It's a light creature, so it counts for that effect. It's also, what it does, if it's normal or special summon, you can target one face-up monster your opponent controls and change it in a face-down defense position. This will nullify a lot of stuff. This will stop creatures from attacking you. This will stop creatures from activating abilities. If they've already activated the ability might still go off unless it's tied to that creature being face-up. If it is, it'll nullify it. This just gets around a lot of stuff. And this is a quick effect, and you can activate it multiple times. So say you go to activate her to pop her out of the graveyard and special summon her to the field and use her ability, and then call to the grave it, trying to banish it from the graveyard to nullify that effect. You can activate her effect again to special summon her on top of her own effect to get around that, so you can chain block with it. The only thing about it is you have to banish 7 other cards from your hand, field, or graveyard. So banishing cards means they're not in the graveyard to give you effects of having different names, which is bad. But we do have some interactions with banished cards. We'll get to that. Plus, remember, if it's banished, we can always use Lumia to get it back. So, also, it's an 1850 attacker. It's a large attacker for a 4-star monster. This thing is gold. This is a great card in this deck. Really, really good tech. Next, we'll talk about Lila, not the summoner, but the enchanter, Lightsworn. She is Lightsworn. Now, what she does is when she's on the field, once per turn, when a spell or trap card effect is activated, as a quick effect, I can banish a Lightsworn monster from my hand or graveyard, target the face-up spell or trap on a face-up spell or trap on the field. It doesn't even have to be the one that activated, and destroy it. Also, if a Lightsworn monster goes off, she'll mill 3 cards for us. So this is great to stop spells or traps. Again, you know, really, really good. That's why we're not running so many copies of the other Lila, because this Lila just does a better job of destroying that creature, or that trap. It's also a 1700 attacker, not bad. Starlight Surfeit is needed for my build specifically because I am running a whole bunch of main deck dragons that are important to my end game. These are all my end game finishers. There is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 dragons main deck that finish the game for me, or can finish the game for me. And what Seraphit does is you can send any number of dragon monsters from your hand or face up on the field to the graveyard. Add 1 dragon monster from your deck. Hmm? Okay, so you can send, sorry about that. So you can send any number of dragon monsters from your hand or face them on the field to add 1 dragon monster from your deck to your hand, whose level is equal to the original levels of the monsters sent to the graveyard. So say I've got 2 of these, or I've got a Judgment Dragon in my hand, and I want to get a Chaos Emperor Dragon. I can then use Seraphit's ability after he's normal summon to send the Chaos Dragon to my graveyard, and then I can go grab the Chaos Emperor out of my deck. That's good, but if he's milled into the graveyard, he also has another effect where you can banish this card from your graveyard, then target 1 level 8 light or dark dragon monster from your graveyard and add it to your hand. You can only use each of this effect once per turn. So if I mill my Chaos Dragons or my Light Pulsar Dragons or my Garganeth into my graveyard and this card into my graveyard, I can then banish this card from my graveyard to put 1 of those back into my hand to be able to use it. That's really, really a powerful effect. I'm only running it as a 1-of because I only really need this effect once or twice per game, and more of them would dilute my Lightsworn strategy, so I'm only running 1-of. The next creature that we have is Celestia, Lightsworn Angel. Now, the great thing about Celestia is you can summon it by tributing a Lightsworn monster. That's how you get it into play. It's a level 5. That's a given. You can tribute other Lightsworn monsters, but when you tribute a a non-Lightsworn monster, but when you tribute a Lightsworn monster, you can send the top 4 cards of your deck to your graveyard. If you do, you can then target up to 2 cards your opponent controls and then destroy those. So this is a 3-for-1. You get a 2300 attacker. Well, it's a 2-for-1 because you got to attribute a monster. So you get a 2300 attacker into play. You send a Lightsworn to the graveyard for effects that care about that. You send 4 cards to the top of your deck to your graveyard to also fill up your graveyard, get your other effects, and then you get to destroy 2 cards your opponent controls. That's a heck of a deal. If it were, but because it's a 5-star monster, you don't really want to overload the top end of your deck. So that's why I'm only running as a 1-of. It could be replaced by a dragon or another card, but I think it's decent. Now, talking about top end, the reason we have so much top end, which is like 9 top end cards, is because we're milling ourselves. That means if I was only running 3 Chaos Dragons, and I found this out on my own, and 1 Garganoth, that's 4 creatures, the likelihood of them landing in my hand and not in the graveyard is low, very, very low. So I wasn't being able to utilize them. Once I up the number of game threats that I could use, the more often I get them in my hand, the better off I am. So that's why we're running so much top end. Next, we're going to talk about Garganeth, the Lightsworn Dragon. Level 6, so you can tribute summon it into play. But also, it gets 300 attack and defense for each Lightsworn monster with a different name in our graveyard. So this thing can get huge. Really, really huge. And it has lower defense, but it can be defensive. If it attacks a defensive position monster, it can inflict piercing damage, and that's important. There's a card out there called Crooked Cook that if it's summoned using exceed summons using a certain monster as material, it cannot be destroyed by effects and it cannot be destroyed by combat. It will shut you down, and then the deck will win through other means besides combat. Piercing damage gets around this, cannot be destroyed by effects or destroyed by battle, because it'll just deal the damage to the player and ignore the creature. I don't know if it destroys the creature. I heard it destroys the creature, but I know it at least hits the player with the damage. So that's important. So this creature can get dumbly huge very quickly. And we can get it back with our Starlight Sheriff It. So really good. 2 of. Next is Light Pulsar Dragon. It's 2,500 attacker. It can be tribute summoned. It can also be special summoned from our hand by banishing 1 light and 1 dark monster from our graveyard. That's why we have light monsters and dark monsters in this deck, is so we can utilize Light Pulsar Dragon. Also, if it's in our graveyard, we can send 1 light and 1 dark monster from our hand to the graveyard to special summon it. That's really good. So it doesn't matter where this card ends up, whether hand or graveyard, we'll still be able to special summon it. That's good. The next thing is when it's sent from the field to the graveyard, I can target 1 level 5 or higher dark dragon monster in our graveyard and special summon that target. So we can at least get Chaos Emperor Dragon back for the Light Pulsar Dragon. We'll go into another thing here in a second that this could use and talk about in a second. We'll talk about Punishment Dragon, which you'll notice is absent from my list, but I'll explain why. Next, we'll talk about some old school tech called Chaos Emperor Dragon. It is a level 8. That means it would take 2 tributes to summon, but it cannot be normal summon or set, so you're not going to be doing that. It must be special summon from our hand. It's a 3,000 attack, which is huge. Now, you have to banish 1 light and 1 dark monster from our graveyard, but as we've seen, that's easy setup for us. So getting this out is not a problem. Then once per turn, you can pay 1,000 life points and send as many cards in both players' hands and on the field as possible. So we just dip all of our hands and all the cards on the field to the graveyard. And then it inflicts 300 damage to your opponent for each card sent to the opponent's graveyard by this effect. So if they swarmed out and have a complete full board, you can do massive amounts of damage with this card. You cannot activate other card effects during the turn you activate this card effect. Really good as a 1-of. It's done a lot of work for me. I really like it. Next is our boss monster, the Judgment Dragon. This thing cannot be normal or summon, or special summon. It's a level 8, so that takes 2 tributes anyways, but it has 3,000 attack. What's really important is its ability. If you have this must be special summon. The way you special summon it from your hand is by having 4 or more Lightsworn monsters with different names. That's why we have so many Lightsworn with different names, is we're looking to set up special summoning the Judgment Dragon. If it ends up in our graveyard, we can get it back with the Starlit Shifrit. But it's a 3-of because we really want this dragon. Its ability is pay 1,000 life points, destroy all other cards on the field. Also at end of phase, it also mills us for 4 cards, which is fine. Paying 1,000 life points to destroy all other cards on the field is great. Really great. The second great thing about this ability is it's not a once per turn effect. You can activate it as many times as you can pay life points. What this means is if you have 2 cards on the field and 1 is vulnerable and giving another card protection, you can blow that card up with the first round and then activate it again to blow up the card that had the protection. So it gets around a lot of locks, soft locks. It really does. It's a really amazing creature. 3-of. Definitely top end and your best boss monster, except for one we'll see later in the extra deck. Next, we're going to talk about our spells. We have 1 Regeki. Now I know this is restricted to 2, and you can run to Regeki. But you mill this card a lot of the times and don't get to utilize it fully anyways. Now, milling these cards are terrible, and I'll tell you why. Okay, Fairy Tale Snow wants you to banish 7 cards from your library, from your graveyard to put into play. Now, you don't really want to banish your Lightsworn monsters because you want different names and stuff to get your Judgment Dragon. So spells that you wouldn't be able to utilize from your graveyard anyways are perfect fodder for banishment to activate Fairy Tale's ability. They line up really well. So if this ends up in your graveyard and you're not able to use it, don't fret about it. I don't run 2 because, like I said, most of the time it gets milled and isn't useful anyways. It's good for in the opening hand. In a 60 card deck, 2 copies isn't really much more than 1 copy. The probability of drawing is not that much higher. Next, you only get 1 copy of Harpy's Feather Duster, but it destroys all spells and traps your opponents control. This destroys all monsters your opponents control. That's why these are restricted and they're run in practically every deck. I recommend them in almost every list. They're just that good. Next, you only get 1 copy of Monster Reborn. Target 1 monster in either graveyard and special summon it. So if we end up having need another Lightsworn creature, we can get it out of our deck. Out of our graveyard to go into summoning from our extra deck. We can also steal our opponent's good monsters out of their graveyard. One game I stole an opponent's tutor out of his graveyard so I can special summon into one of my boss monsters from my extra deck. This is a really flexible card. It's very powerful, that's why it's restricted to 1. Great card. Next, we're going to talk about our card advantage, which are these 6 cards plus these 3 cards down here. That's 9 cards. Plus, Gargoth makes 10 cards, plus Maxine makes 13 cards that are card advantage. That's a lot of card advantage. What these do is allow us to discard 1 Lightsworn monster to draw 2 cards, and then we send the top 2 cards to our graveyard. So basically, we're gained plus 3 in card advantage by discarding a Lightsworn, which, discarding a Lightsworn is not terrible to us for the effects we want, so it's almost a plus 5. It's really good. Now, Nash up here can negate this effect, so be careful. The next is really good. Charge of the Light Brigade. We can send 3 cards to the top of our deck to our graveyard and add 1 level 4 or lower Lightsworn monster from our deck to our hand. So we get to choose what we want. And this lines up really good with a summoner. So mill in 3 Lightsworn monsters, grab a summoner, discard a card, then summon one of the cards that you just milled with Charge of the Light Brigade. Great card advantage. Great spell. Also could be stopped by Ash, just to be aware. Next, we're going to talk about Galaxy Cyclone. Galaxy Cyclone is great because you could, if it's in your hand, you can target 1 spell or trap on the field that's set. That means face down and destroy it. Except for the turn that this card was sent to the graveyard, you can banish this card to target 1 face-up spell or trap on the field and destroy it. So if this gets milled, it can still hit face-up spells and traps. If it's not milled, it can hit face-down spells and traps, and then later hit a face-up spell or trap. Great card in a deck that was looking to put cards in its graveyard. Highly recommend it. Was running it as a 3 of, but right now I have it as a 2 of because I have other effects that deal with traps and spells. So good. Very good. Next is the Grass is Greener, which we talked about, that allows us to ultra mill against 40 card decks. Sometimes it's dead. Sometimes it's the best card you can draw. It's really, really good, and it's restricted to 2 for a reason. Gotta run this card in this deck. It makes it work. It is a engine within itself. Next is Pot of Extravagance. Now, Pot of Extravagance allows you to banish 3 to 6 random face-down cards from our extra deck and draw 1 card for every 3 cards banished. So we can either draw 1 or 2 cards by banishing cards from our extra deck, which is fine. That's fine. When it resolves, you can't use any other draw effects, and you must use it at the start of your main phase. This must be the first card you cast or activate in your main phase, or you're cut off from it. Just extra card advantage. We don't mind really getting rid of some of our extra deck creatures. We usually hit this as a 6 of, because we have multiple copies of Curious, we have multiple copies of Minerva, so usually 1 or 2 stick around, and our other boss monsters make up the difference from the ones that get milled or banished, so it's not bad. It's good. Call by the Grave is a quick play spell. You can play it from your hand on your turn, or set it and play it from the field on your opponent's turn. What it does is, you can target one monster in your opponent's graveyard, banish it. If you do, you negate its effects, as well as activated effects and effects on the field of monsters with the same name. So this stops stuff from going off that was sent to the graveyard. It'll also counter Ash. It'll counter any of your hand traps, Maxi, Bell, Ash, Ogre. That's what it's mainly used for, but it shuts down other graveyard centric abilities as well. It's only a 2 of, it's restricted to 2 of. I'm running both. Great card, absolutely a staple in most decks. Next is Forbidden Droplet. Forbidden Droplet is also a quick play spell. The great thing about Forbidden Droplet is you can discard cards and choose as many effect monsters your opponent controls as the discarded cards. Until the end of turn, their attack is halved, which is really important because it'll stop creatures from pushing over on you for a turn, and it'll also negate their effects. Negating their effects is the most important part. It'll stop a lot of shenanigans. You don't mind discarding because you want Lightsworn monsters in your graveyard anyways to activate your effects, so it's fine. The other thing is your opponent cannot respond to the droplet with effects of cards of the same original type as the card sent to the graveyard to activate this card. So if you drop a monster, spell, or trap, drop all 3, they can't respond to it at all. But, you know, like they have monsters out there to activate it to try and nullify it. If you drop a monster, they can't. So it's going to get through. It's a really, really effective spell. I highly recommend it. Next is Lost Wind. It's a trap. You have to set it on your turn, and then it's active on your opponent's turn, and then every turn after that. You can target one face-up special summon monster on the field and negate its effects. It also has the original attack power of that monster. Then, the great thing about it is if it's in the graveyard and your opponent summons a special summons a monster from their extra deck, you can then set this card. But after it is activated, after you set it, or at least the field, it's banished. So if we mill this card, we can at least set it back if your opponent special summons, and then later negate a creature's ability. So it's effective. It's really good. It can be milled and be used again. It's awesome. Next is Solo Judgment. This is a counter trap, meaning you can set it and then any turn activate it. And it's basically a counter spell, like in Magic. If a monster would be summoned or a spell or trap activated, you pay half your life points, which is a big ask, but it negates the summon or the activation and destroys the card that was summoned or activated. This stops a lot of shenanigans. This is your no spell. This is when you absolutely cannot let something go off, or it'll end the game for you. This is the best counter trap there is. It is a staple in most decks. I'm running it as a 2 of. It would not be bad as a 3 of. Now, one card I'm not running in the main that should be here is Punishment Dragon. And the thing about Punishment Dragon is, let me find it. Oh boy, hold on. Let me click this one and see if it'll pop up here. Here it is. Punishment Dragon is a level 8, 3000, just like the Judgment Dragon. It cannot be normal summoner set, just like the Judgment Dragon. Must be special summoned by your hand by having 4 or more banished Lightsworn monsters with different names. That's easy for us to set up. This card can't go in this deck. I might even find a spot for it by cutting either a Celestia or a Garganeth. Maybe. The problem and the reason it's not in my list at this point is I've had it a bunch of times in my hand. I was able to get it back. It's also a dark attribute. I want to point that out. But I was never able to summon it. I was never in the position to get it in play. Also, once per turn, you can pay 1,000 life points to shuffle into the deck all cards in all graveyards and all face-up banished cards, except for Lightsworn monsters, once per turn. If a Lightsworn effect would be activated, this mills 4 cards. I just haven't had it set up. It should probably be in the deck, but it just has not worked for me. It might end up in the deck later. It's definitely a maybe. Moving on to the extra deck. The first one we're going to talk about is Flame Veil, whatever that is. It is a level 6, but you can synchro summon it with a tuner and a non-tuner. So that's pretty easy. It's a 2100 attack. If it attacks a defensive position monster, it inflicts piercing damage. If this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent, it gains 300 attack. So it gets bigger every time it hits your opponent with that piercing damage. It's really good against, it's a toolbox kit card for things like Crooked Cook, things that cannot be usually destroyed by battle. That's what it's for. Next, Black Rose Dragon can be summoned with a tuner and a non-tuner. When it's synchro summoned, you can destroy all cards, including itself, on the field. So it's a board wipe, a symmetrical board wipe, but a board wipe nonetheless. You can banish 1 plant monster from your graveyard, target 1 defense monster your opponent controls, change it to face-up to attack position. If you do, its attack becomes 0. This second ability comes up very, very little, because I only have 1 other plant monster, and it's also a synchro summon. So not really that relevant on a second ability, but being able to board wipe is okay. Being able to summon it as a 2400 attacker, pretty good. Next is Michael, an all-star in the deck. It is the Arc Lightsworn. Michael is a 2600 attacker. It takes 1 tuner and 1 non-tuner light monster, which we have plenty of, to summon it. Once per turn, you can pay 1,000 life points and target 1 card on the field and banish it. That gets rid of cards that cannot be destroyed. That's a really good effect. When this card is destroyed, you can target any number of other Lightsworn monsters in your graveyard, shuffle them into your deck, and then you gain 300 life points for each return card. And then at the end of the turn, it mills you for 3. So it gains you a lot of life, it stops you from decking yourself, it banishes cards, and it's a 2600 attack power. It is a boss monster. Next is Black Rose Moonlight Dragon, which takes 1 tuner and 1 non-tuner. It's a card is special summoned, or a level 5 or higher monster is special summoned to your opponent's field. You can target 1 special summon monster your opponent controls and return it to their hand. So it's a negate. 2400 attack power, a negate for special summon monsters. Excellent. Moving on. Next is Stardust Dragon. Takes 1 tuner and 1 non-tuner. If a card or effect would be activated that destroy a card on the field, I contribute this card and negate the activation and destroy it. So this protects my other stuff out there on the field if I can get it out. Pretty decent. Pretty decent. If this effect is activated this turn and was not negated, I can then return this special summon this card back from my graveyard. So you tribute it, but if the effect goes through, you get it back. 2500 attack power. Pretty decent. Next is Stardust Spark Dragon. Once per turn, you can target 1 face-up card you control. Once during this turn, it cannot be destroyed by battle or card effects. Another protection effect. Another protection effect, pretty decent. Good effect. Next is Judgment, the Dragon of the Heavens. This is another boss monster. You really, really want this one on the field. Because it's a 3000 power attacker. If you synchro summon it, all materials must be the same attribute. That's pretty easy to do too. Once per turn though, if you have 4 or more tuners with different names in your graveyard and control this synchro summon card, this is kind of a hard effect to do because 4 different tuners with different names. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We can do it, but it's kind of difficult to set it up. But if you do, once per turn, you can pay half your life and destroy all other cards on the field. Also, you cannot special summon monsters for the rest of the turn, except for dragon monsters. And then, at the end of your turn, it banishes 4 cards from the top of your deck. That's a pretty dismal effect, but it would be good if we were running Punishment Dragon. But it's a 3,000 attack power that can wrath everything else on the board. I call that pretty good. Then we have, speaking of wrath, we have Evil Swarm Extinction Knight. It takes 2 level 4 monsters, which our level 4 monsters start here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 different ones, plus multiple copies of Wolf and Fellas. 11, 12, 13 monsters that can do that, so it's pretty easy to get out. Okay. Once you're in the main phase, or your opponent's battle phase, if your opponent has more cards in hand and on the field than you do, you can detach 1 material from this card and destroy all other cards on the field. Your opponent takes no further damage this turn, so it's a wrath effect. 1900 attack, it's pretty weak, but it can wrath. That's why we have it. Next is Dark Bellion Exceeds Dragon, which takes 2 level 4 monsters. If you detach 2 materials from it, you can target 1 face-up monster your opponent controls. It halves its attack, and if it does, this card gains that last attack. So it can become a big attacker. It can shrink a boss monster your opponent has. Sometimes it's useful. Next is one of our namesake cards, Minerva the Exalted Lightsworn, which is basically the Exceeds version of Minerva up here. What it does is it takes 2 level 4 monsters to Exceed summon it. You can detach 1 material from this card to send the top 3 cards of your deck to your graveyard. Then you draw cards equal to the number of Lightsworn cards sent from the graveyard by this effect. So it draws cards, card advantage. Also 2,000 power attacker. Next, if this card is destroyed by battle, or this card is in your possession, is destroyed by an opponent's effect, you can send the top 3 cards of your deck to your graveyard. Then you can destroy the number of cards on the field equal to the number of Lightsworn sent into the graveyard by this effect. So it's a revenge creature, a spite creature. It gets them back. We're running 2 copies because it's really, really good. And that way, if we banish one with our Pot of Extravagance, we have a chance of still having 1 in our extra deck. Next is Tornado Dragon. 2 level 4 monsters, 2100 attack power. You can detach a material to destroy 1 spell or trap. Alright, decent. Good for continuous effects. Next is an Exosister Asphiel. 2100 attacker, takes 2 level 4 monsters, cannot be destroyed by the activated effects of monsters special summoned by the graveyard. So against graveyard-centric decks, this creature's good. Then, once per turn, you skip this effect because we don't have another Exosister to activate this ability, but we can activate this third ability. You can detach 1 material from this card, then target 1 monster your opponents control, and return it to their hand. Great against special summon monsters from the extra deck, because they go back to the extra deck, not the hand. It's a non-destroy effect for your monsters that cannot be destroyed by effects. Decent. Very decent. Comes in handy. Next is Curious the Lightsworn Dominion. It takes 3 monsters with the same attribute to link summon this, but it's a 2400 attacker, and if a face-up card is destroyed by battle or leaves the field because of an opponent's card effect while its owner controls it, you can target 1 card in your graveyard and add it to your hand. So it gives you card advantage for something going wrong. That's good enough. That's decent. You can only use it once per turn. Or you can only use 1 of these effects each turn. When it's linked summon, you can send 1 card from your deck to your graveyard, so you can like set up a Light Pulsar or Dragon or a Seraphit or something like that. That's decent. Alright, and then if a card is sent from your deck to your graveyard by an effect, send the top 3 cards to your library. So it mills you again. So 2 copies of it, just in case Pot of Extravagance gets rid of 1. Pretty decent. It's okay. So there you have it. That's the entire deck for my Lightsworn deck, explaining everything in the deck. If you like it, please leave a comment, subscribe, share. Please share. Let everybody know. I've been Will from Magic the Friendly Tavern. Happy pack pulls, and as always, happy games.